Welcome to the Dynamics of Everyday Life, where we demystify some tricky concepts and get to know ourselves a little bit better. Welcome back to the Dynamics of Everyday Life. At the time of producing this episode, we're a couple of weeks away from Christmas and everything that brings. And whilst I try not to do any content that relates to the time of year, it's inevitable that it's going to reflect on what I'm thinking about. However, if you're listening to this episode in July, first of all, where have you been? And secondly, this is not a Christmas special. What's going on for me at the moment is I'm drawn to thinking about the dynamics of how we can feel when we're around people, particularly those that we don't normally spend huge amounts of time with. And also in a general capacity, how do other people make us feel? So let's get the Christmas references out of the way. It's perfectly normal to feel a bit like the Grinch from time to time, and especially at this time of the year. 2024 has been quite a challenge for a lot of people, myself included, and in amidst all the glad tidings, there can be moments of feeling like you just want to hide under a duvet, home alone, whilst hoovering up vast quantities of Quality Street. Although I'd rather that they had the foil wrappers on. I don't think that makes me very eco-friendly, but I do miss the foil wrappers. And this wish to hide under a duvet when we're completely peopled out is absolutely understandable. It comes to a point where you've literally just had enough. I can see it in my children at the moment. They're completely done with school. And it reminds me of when they were small. And it would get to this point at the end of term in primary school, and you'd go along to pick up in the playground. You could see all the children had just had enough of each other. The teachers had pretty much had enough of everything, and there was no chat to be had amongst the parents because we were just done with it. Without wishing to sound a bit bar humbug, it's possibly kind of to be expected when Christmas pretty much starts in September in the shops. Do not get me started on the whole Christmas candle issue, because I might want to buy a Christmas candle in the middle of December when it's Christmas. But if I've not bought it in October, then I'm not going to be able to find one. So that's my own particular bugbear. I shall get down off my soapbox for that one. So back to today's topic, how we feel when we're around people. And as I've mentioned, this can have an impact on us at any time of year. There are some people who we feel absolutely fantastic around, and there are also some people that we feel a bit miserable after we've spent some time with them. Have a think about the times that you've spent with people and you've come away and hardly recognised yourself afterwards. I suspect you've heard the term drains and radiators. So what we're talking about there is some people drain us and our energy, and some people lift us up because they're radiating positive energy out. Another way to think of it is a bit like the Dementors in Harry Potter. For those of you that are familiar with the wizarding world, it can feel a bit like your soul is being dragged out of your body. And a quick aside here, this is something I learned quite early on as a coach. Some people are going to want to spend time with you because of what they can get from you. Some people will want to spend time with you because of how you make them feel when they're with you. And some people are going to want to spend time with you because they genuinely enjoy your company. Choose wisely, because you will know if you don't. And much as I'd like to claim the title of today's episode as All My Own Work, it's not. It's part of a quote from the wonderful Maya Angelou, and the quote in full is, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." And this is really true. Memory is quite an odd thing. As the late Queen said, recollections may vary. I don't know who wrote that for her or if it was indeed one of the things that she said, but it is a fabulous phrase. Because we do all remember things differently, and we don't remember conversations or actions correctly all the time. But what we do remember is how we felt, and we attribute this to people, and it stays with us. Is this just a personality clash? Do we just get on with some people and not with others? Well, maybe that's how it is in some cases. If we have wildly differing political views, then the chances are that we aren't going to get on. And if you don't like James Bond, then can we ever be friends? Unlikely. Unless you're able to introduce me to Stan Wawrinka or Matteo Berrettini, I might make an excuse for non-Bond fans if you've got that up your sleeve. But realistically, I can't help feeling that there's something deeper in this than a clash of likes and dislikes. So let's have a think about this from a psychodynamic point of view. What might be happening for us here? One thing that can play into our interpersonal relationships is transference. Now, we haven't talked about transference for quite a while. We've been focusing quite a lot on the defence mechanisms. So for those of you that are just joining the podcast, or for those of you who don't think in psychodynamic terms all the time, I will recap transference for you. So transference, from a psychodynamic perspective, is where we are replaying elements of our primal relationships in a relationship in the here and now. So to give you an example, when I did my latest round of coaching accreditation, I had a mentor, a coaching mentor, who, as far as I was concerned, was the greatest coach that ever walked the planet. And I would get everything ready for him before my sessions, or my paper would be lined up. I'd have my questions written down. Things would be highlighted. I may as well have had an apple for the teacher. And I caught sight of myself and I thought, oh, that's interesting. Why are you doing that? You wouldn't normally do that. And it's because I wanted to impress him. I wanted to impress him with my academic achievements in the same way that I would want to impress my father, who was a headmaster. So this is an example of a really positive transference. It worked. I got my MCC first go, which is not necessarily something that always happens, but this was an example of a positive transference. I was playing out something with my mentor that wasn't appropriate to him. It can also happen in a more negative scenario where we act out elements of a more critical relationship. We can hear how somebody's communicating with us and we can interpret that in a more critical way if we had a more critical relationship with our primary carers. So that would be an example of a more negative transference. And it happens in a lot of our everyday relationships. We've then got counter-transference. So that's where you respond to the transference that's happening within the relationship. So in the example of my mentor, if he'd then started behaving like my father, that would have been counter-transference. He would have been responding to the transference that I was bringing to the situation. So we've got this swirl of dynamics. So we can be responding to people as if it's not the relationship in the here and now. And this is where it can get quite confusing. Don't forget as well that our brains are really energy-hungry beasts, and they're going to want to take the quickest route possible. So transference here plays in beautifully because this is our tried and tested approach. When something happens in a relationship, when we get a reminder, when there's a hook that we're drawn into, our brain goes, oh, hello. Yes, I remember this. So when I'm in this dynamic, this is how I respond because this is how I feel safe. So it's part of our blueprints that when we're around certain people or we're around people that remind us of previous situations that we're familiar with, we're going to fall back into those patterns of behaviour because we know them. I would say that they feel comfortable. And you might be thinking, that is really not a comfortable place for me to be at all. But what I'm meaning when I say it feels comfortable is that it feels known. So the brain understands it, which is why it feels comfortable. Other impacts on how we feel when we're around people are projection and projective identification. So projection, it's one of the defence mechanisms, and what's happening in projection is where we have bits of ourselves that we don't like very much, that we split out of ourselves and we put into somebody else. And that other person can then walk around thinking, oh, I have this interesting feeling, but it doesn't feel like it belongs to me. What's going on here? If you are with somebody who you spend time with someone and you think, oh, I don't feel great after I've been with this person. Generally speaking, what's happening is they are projecting some negative bits of themselves into you, and that's what you are responding to. Now, if we identify with this, it then becomes projective identification. So that's when somebody splits something out of themselves, the bits that they don't like, they locate it in somebody else, and that other person takes it on as if it's part of their own personality. So if you spend time with somebody who doesn't make you feel good, and then you walk out thinking, no, I don't feel good, what you've done is you've taken their bad feeling and you've made it your own. So we've identified with that projection. So it wasn't yours to start with. So which is why some people can project and radiate really positive energy, and you can't help but take some of that on board. Then there are other people who drain you, and that's not necessarily as positive for us. Well, it's not really positive at all. But that's how that works. That's why we can end up thinking, oh, I'm carrying somebody else's stuff and I just don't feel good about it. So what can we do about this? As always, awareness is absolutely key. The first thing that we can do is notice how we feel around people. Do they lift you up? Or do they leave you feeling exhausted? Another thing that you can do is to ask the people closest to you if you behave differently around certain people or in certain groups. You might be really surprised at the answers to this. Also, consider where you're spending your time and allocating your energy. Sometimes we feel that we should spend time with people, and then what can happen is we can start to feel a bit resentful because realistically we don't actually want to. Check in with how you're feeling at various points in the day after you've been in different people's company. And if you start to notice that you don't feel like you normally do, or you're beginning to not recognise yourself at times, then consider if you're having a transference response or what you're actually doing is you're dealing with somebody else's projections. My invitation to you this week is to think about who you are with when you're feeling at your best and who you are with when you're not feeling great. Again, you might need somebody else to point this out to you, somebody close to you who knows what you're like when you're feeling at your best and who knows what you're like when you're not feeling great. What can you do around the times when you're not at your best? Have a think about whether it's something that's being projected into you that you're actually identifying with. Could you be caught up in a transference response? What needs to happen for this dynamic to work in the best way possible? Do you need to have some boundaries with other people? Do you need to see some people only in company? You need to be seeing them in a diluted form for this relationship to work for you. How can you manage this so that you are getting the best deal in this situation? And as always, give yourself some grace. It can be really difficult to recognise that we've been carrying other people's projections at the expense of our own feelings. Looking at ourselves at this level can be challenging and unnerving as we develop our awareness, so I'd always encourage that you do this at your own speed. If you feel you need some extra help around this, then I've put together a PDF resource sheet and you can find the link for this in the show notes. If you'd like to have a chat with me about psychodynamics or whether I'm the right coach, supervisor or mentor for you, then click on the link that's also in the show notes. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Dynamics of Everyday Life. Please hit the follow button for future episodes and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow me on Instagram at The Dynamics of Everyday Life or find me on LinkedIn at Julia Rogers. I'd love to hear from you and hear your thoughts on dynamics. The Dynamics of Everyday Life is brought to you by Coaching 42 and the fabulous team at the Podcast Boutique.